What a time to be alive, huh? As a therapist, just watching smut on the internet with my friends. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name's Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today, we're talking about Bridgerton sex scenes because as a therapist, I educate about sex and communication and relationships a fair amount on this channel. So, in case you didn't know, in case you didn't watch one of our recent episodes of the pod, which by the way goes up every Thursday, link in description, we have talked about how Aaron and I are hopelessly obsessed with Bridgerton, and because my therapist brain can't stop ruining my favorite TV shows, we're here today to psychoanalyze the sex and relationships in Bridgerton, because there's actually like a surprising amount for us to unpack. So it does not matter if you've never seen Bridgerton, because we're going to watch the show together. Mostly, hopefully, to whatever degree we can. This is like a great little like masturbatory supercut of all of the hot and sexy scenes in Bridgerton. Not all of them, but a good amount of them. So that's it. Also, if you're new here, hi, thanks for coming. You should subscribe. Before we get into this episode, also, I want to give a quick trigger warning. We are going to discuss SA and issues of non-consent later. So I'll give you guys a warning before we get to that scene, but just as a heads up, this video does contain discussion of that. Okay, we're going to go in chronological order because I think that makes the most sense. So the first scene that we're talking about is not the sex scene that you might anticipate, because it's Daphne having sex with herself. So let's watch. Also, can we just talk about how much sexier masturbating would be if I could do it by candlelight all the time? The hands. Nice touch. Her playing the piano after this is so funny.
You finished. How lovely.
Very loud, Bridgerton, we see you. The reason that I wanted to talk about this scene is because, first and foremost, the show speaks a lot. The show has a lot of dialogue and discourse about how the women especially have no concept of what a sexual relationship looks like. And I want to address this because especially for those of us who have recovered from like purity culture bullshit and had difficulty in embracing our own sexuality and learning about sexuality, it is, I think, an inherent truth that being robbed of your autonomy in regards to education about your body and about sexuality and about relationships is like a safety issue, right? This will come up later, but having a good education about what actually healthy and safe and consensual sex and eroticism looks like is critical. And so this scene, in seeing like the female protagonist educating herself and familiarizing herself with her body before engaging in sex with someone else, is like a nice representation and something that we should be uplifting more, quite honestly. This is also a nice point for me to give you the friendly therapist PSA that masturbation is in fact a valid coping strategy. Sensual in the five senses kind of way, coping strategies can be a great way to ground your body, right? So that doesn't just include temperature regulation or physically grounding your body by like laying on the ground or meditating. This can also include masturbation. It can also include incorporating pleasure into your life. So if you find, especially in the throes of depression or mood dysregulation, that masturbation is an easy way to introduce an extra boost of serotonin and dopamine into your life, please know that that's very valid. That's a very human and okay thing to do, and it's not wrong or bad. Speaking of masturbation, I want to talk to you about this week's sponsor, which is Beducated. We've worked with Beducated a lot on this channel because I love them. I'm excited to share the magic of Beducated with you again today, because for those of you who don't know, Beducated is an online platform that is dedicated to all things sex and relationship learning, and they have over 100 courses from industry experts with reliable and fact-based information to educate about all manner of things, including self-guided masturbation and kinky sex and dirty talk and daddy roleplay and using a strap-on, any and everything that you can think of that might be related to sex or relationships learning. It's on this platform. My favorite thing about Beducated is that it's fact-based and reliable information from experts. I have recently been really enjoying the self-pleasure journey course because it's nice for me to take some time to really recenter myself in the truth that pleasure is something that I get to own and that I get to engage in for me, and that while I can share it with partners, it is also healthy and okay for me to center myself in that. So if you want to get started on your own self-pleasure journey, go click the link in the description and sign up for Beducated. If you use code Mickey Atkins at checkout, you can get 40% off of the annual pass, which is a wild discount, y'all. Beducated also has a 14-day money-back guarantee and a 24-hour free trial. So if you just want to test it out and see how you like it, there's genuinely no risk involved. But like I said, I'm a Beducated fangirl and I think y'all will really enjoy it. So go click that link, show Beducated some love for showing me some love. And thank you, Beducated, for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and hop back into Bridgerton. Okay, the second scene that I want to talk to you about is between Daphne and Simon after they are already married. I feel remiss if we don't cover some of the more iconic sex scenes in Bridgerton. So we're going to talk about this one before we talk about like the controversial sex scene from season 1. So let's talk about this first.
You burn for me.
Why do you think I followed you into that garden?
Why do you week I went into that garden. If you would have only looked at me this week for longer than 2 seconds, you would have seen. It is you I cannot sacrifice.
This is a friendly reminder that the foundational piece of a good and healthy sex life is good communication, especially, again, for those of us who have survived purity culture or like shame and judgment generally. Even if you didn't grow up religious, the world heaps a lot of fucking shame, especially on those of us who have been subjected to misogyny, about empowerment and educating ourselves about sex and our own bodies. And so we can feel some shame, some judgment, some fear, especially anxiety or trepidation about being clear about our wants and needs and interests sexually. This is just a friendly PSA that having those conversations, being clear about those things can help to avoid, first of all, a lot of confusion, but can also open up your sex life to like a whole world of pleasure and fun and connection that you might not get to access otherwise if you're not able to push past that anxiety to be communicative. Therapists are very much people who can help you with this, by the way. I have very much hosted conversations, both like had my own therapist host this conversation for me and hosted this conversation for my own clients as a clinician about how do I express this thing? How do I talk about this topic? How do I push past this anxiety around this topic of sex or intimacy or my body? It's a necessary thing. And also, for what it's worth, you're not alone in that. Lots of people experience it, and it is figure outable, it is workable, and it can, again, open you up to a whole world of like pleasure and fun.
I burn for you.
Yeah, you do, Daphne. The music in this show is so good. You guys probably won't be able to hear it because you don't want to get copyrighted, but it's so good. Breathing passionately.
Do you want me to stop?
This is just a moment that I want to pause and give some golf claps to Simon for doing the thing that we should all be doing in our sexual relationships, which is pausing to ask for consent. People often, especially because like being a, you know, like a Gen Z millennial cusper, growing up in a world that was really herky-jerky and awkward in regards to conversations about consent, there's usually a pushback of like, that's not sexy, like, blah, 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 blah. And like, this is a perfect example of checking in with your partner, asking if they want you to stop, how they feel about this situation without it being herky-jerky or weird. For what it's worth, obviously the first time that you do it, or if you're unfamiliar with it, it might feel kind of awkward. And like, personally, I think we should destigmatize awkward moments during sex anyways. But also with time, with experience, with repetition, it will become more natural and feel more intuitive for you to voice that in a way that sounds like you, to simply ask the question of like, is this okay? Do you like this? Do you want me to stop? Should we do something else? All of these are important and foundational questions that we should be asking if we're being intimate in any regard with someone. Again, this will be relevant later.
Stop. I want to show you more.
The fact that she doesn't know is maddening. Also, can I just say, if I had to take a corset off and put a corset on every time I was going to get freaky, I'm staying naked. I'm just simply not putting anything back on. Also, for what it's worth, this I think is a good example of what foreplay can look like. People often confuse foreplay to mean only like sex relating to your hands or oral or things like that. It can also be slowly undressing your partner, right? It can also be slowly with gentleness and intention exploring you and your partner's bodies, right? Gentle touches and like careful, like sensual experiences like this are very much part of building arousal and tension and anticipation in a sexual encounter. And like, don't be afraid to do that. It's not a thing you have to rush to the finish line, because also there shouldn't be a finish line in sex anyways. What a time to be alive, huh? As a therapist, just watching smut on the internet with my friends.
Like we talked about. Show me.
This can also be a part of foreplay.
I cannot.
I want to pause here. 2 things. This can also be a great part of building tension, building anticipation in a sexual encounter, but it's also a great way to learn about your partner. People often have fear and anxiety about like, I don't know what my partner likes, or like, what if I'm bad in bed, right? A great way to do this is by asking your partner, show me, right? A common example is for folks to have your partner place their hand over yours in a particularly sensual area. It doesn't have to be their genitals, to be clear, but any area that's like an interest sexually, and to have them help guide your hand in a way that feels pleasurable or interesting or exciting, right? This is a great way for you to build connection. It's also a great way for us to make sure that we're being mindful of consent and things like that, because your partner's literally guiding your hand. And again, is a moment where we can help to build this tension and anticipation and to learn about your partner. I've talked about this on the channel before, but the difference between people who are like good in bed and bad in bed is it has very little to do, in my mind, or my opinion, with experience, and more to do with being a very curious, very interested, and very communicative person in regards regards to what your partner in this moment specifically likes or wants. I forgot to tell you the second thing. Tell me you have ADHD without telling me. The second thing, Daphne, after his request to say, like, he says, you know, show me, and she says, I can't. This is very normal. It's very common, again, especially for those of us who have been subjected to misogyny and for those of us who have grown up in a world where sex is perceived as a performance rather than an experience. It can feel really scary to do this. Please know that you're very valid in this. And also, part of intimacy and closeness and connection in any capacity, this is not a place where we're uplifting the belief that sex is between a man and a woman who are married, right? Like, hookup culture is very valid, provided we're engaging with like healthy boundaries and respect for ourselves and others, and you get it. And part of that vulnerability and connection of being sexually or physically intimate with someone can mean trusting this person to suspend that level of self-judgment or self-perception, to be immersed in this moment, right? To ground yourself in your body and to be present in that moment rather than being up here. It's obviously more difficult to do than it is to say, but again, with practice and repetition, and especially if you're practicing this skill with somebody that you have repeated sexual encounters with and a level of trust and intimacy and closeness, this can be a great way for you to grow in your own sensuality and also, again, to build that closeness in a partnership. So just know if you have anxiety about that, very valid, very normal, and again, also a thing that is workable with time. The shock that she has at seeing a penis is so upsetting. You should know what a penis looks like before, like, it's right about to go inside of you. This is why sex education is critical, and also why it's a crime that it's being gutted in most states in our country.
That's my ultimate.
It shouldn't. Pause. Listen, I know this is a period piece, okay? I get it. And we're suspending disbelief. And also, if we are building anticipation, we're building tension, we're engaging in foreplay, we're being gentle and kind and giving our bodies time to do the things that bodies will often do in moments like this, like, for example, produce an appropriate amount of vaginal lubrication before we penetrate it with anything. Generally speaking, even though having sex or penetrative sex for the first time can be a foreign sensation, it might be a bit uncomfortable depending on the particular anatomy involved. Generally speaking, if we're giving ourselves the time and the space, and we've also built up to this moment by engaging in sex acts that aren't penetrative specifically, generally, ideally speaking, it shouldn't hurt. There are very much issues that can arise for folks, especially like vaginismus is the one that comes to mind, and that's discussed most often, but it is very common for people to have difficulty with penetrative sex regardless of whether you have vaginismus or not, especially if we've survived a trauma around a sexual or around like a genital issue. And again, barring all of these complicating factors, generally speaking, sex should be pleasurable. It should be enjoyable. It should not be something that hurts for the very first time that you do it. This is very much a myth that's been perpetuated on behalf of like the misogynistic view in our culture that like having sex for the first time is a thing that's mostly fun for men or for people with penises. And well, for cis men. And like, that's not true. That's not helpful. Again, we should be prioritizing the pleasure and the enjoyment and the safety of everybody involved. I've never realized how long these sex scenes are before now.
I was thinking that.
When you're watching it, you're all whipped up. And now I'm watching it with you guys. I'm like, God, this is really on and on, huh? See, that's the experience you should have. Feeling of joy, connection, closeness, tasteful fade out. You love to see it. Oh no, just kidding. There's more thrusting happening. I think you get it. We've discussed, I think, what's clinically relevant for this interaction. I also would like to talk about more than two of the sex scenes in this show. So let's move on to our next scene. All right, this scene is definitely going to be muted for most of it because we all know that Taylor Swift is a capitalist girly and will absolutely steal my AdSense. So there's probably not going to be audio for this. However, I want to talk about this before we talk about the most problematic sex scene from, I think, the whole show, honestly, to like level set and talk about one more thing before we get there. So very cute, very playful. Wanting to be playful and silly as part of your sex life is a very valid and normal thing, to be clear. It's not a thing that should be serious all the time. All of a sudden, her hair is down. This is very, like, we just discovered sex for the first time and we can't stop fucking. Aaron and I talked about this on the pod. This would definitely have been us if we waited to have sex until we were married. It's normal to have a heightened interest in it when you first discover it. It's fun.
Tell me what you want.
This is, again, Simon being a consent king. Good for him.
You.
Also, can we talk about their poor staff? Just watching these two fucking all over the estate. I would be so annoyed. Like, pay me more for being subjected to this. Two things. The reason that I want to talk about this first and foremost is because this is just a good moment for us to level set that sex doesn't look the way that it does in TV shows, right? This is a very, very short snippet. And like, yes, it's a TV show, right? We're all suspending disbelief in all of the things. And also, just to be clear from an educational perspective, not to put any judgment on Simon's name, but while people will engage in penetrative sex for an amount of time that makes sense for them, and also there are practical limitations in regards to the way that, like, for example, penises become less hard after ejaculation, and so that limits our ability to continue to engage in penetrative sex. And also, it's rarely the case that sex will last this short and that we will end in a perfectly timed mutual climax, right? That's not real. The reality is that especially for folks who are engaging in penetrative sex with someone who has a penis and somebody who has a vagina, that there will often be either a before or an after period where we need to have a conversation about how typically folks who have vaginas and or clitorises will take longer and require a different type of stimulation in order to orgasm or climax. It's rare for folks to climax from penetration alone, especially penetration that does not last a very long time. So do feel allowed and empowered to say, excuse me, I'm not done. And just because you climaxed does not mean that sex is over. That's a very important part of a healthy communication in regards to sex and climax, and that your pleasure is just as necessary and valid and valuable and important, right? It's a non-negotiable, depending on how you feel about it, to feel taken care of and to feel as though your pleasure is being prioritized in a sexual encounter. That's allowed. For what it's worth, this is also why I will forever recommend resources like Beducated, because being educated about sex and intimacy and relationships is very much a way that we can grow ourselves and our comfortability with things like sex and intimacy, and also a way that we can help to move past the anxiety and the fear and the discomfort that can show up for a lot of us. Again, those of us especially who have been targeted by misogyny, and having access to those resources is so critical. So like, very much check out Beducated in the description if you haven't already. Let's talk about the problematic scene. Okay, this is the problematic scene from season 1, from the whole show, really. Again, trigger warning for SA and consent violations. This scene is pretty hard to watch. It's important for us to talk about, so we're doing that, but do take care of yourself. Please don't subject yourself to material that's distressing for you needlessly, because again, this is hard to watch. Okay, for context also, Simon and Daphne are married, and they have discussed the fact that I don't want to give you guys a brief about the whole fucking show. The general gist of what's happening here is that Simon and Daphne are in fact married, but Simon has been very clear that he cannot have children. This is because he's made a vow to himself and to his dad, his parental trauma problems, that he does not want to carry on his family name, and so for that reason he doesn't want to have children, and therefore up to this point he has not ejaculated inside of Daphne in the hopes of not getting her pregnant, right? Daphne misunderstood this to mean that he was infertile and unable to have children rather than that he did not want to have children. So this has created a conflict between the two of them, and the issue at hand here is that Daphne wants to have kids, Simon does not, and Simon has not, again, ejaculated inside of Daphne for that reason. So that's what the context is regarding the scene. Also, this whole thing is going to be muted probably because there's music under it, so. For what it's worth, again, just to set the record straight in regards to realism, I know it's a TV show, I get it. And also the expectation that you would go from initiating a sexual encounter to penetration in like 5 seconds time, not a realistic expectation for lots of people. And also sometimes regardless of how long we're engaging in foreplay and anticipation and tension building and all the things, sometimes vaginas just don't self-lubricate in the way that we might hope they would. And lube is a great resource and a thing that most people should keep as part of their arsenal in case you need it. It makes things more comfortable. It can also be like quite literally an accessibility tool. And on top of that, do be mindful about the type of lube you're using. If you are a person who is trying to avoid getting pregnant and you're using a condom to do that, please don't use silicone-based lubes because it will degrade the latex in a condom and cause it to break and or just make it more likely to break. So be careful about the type of lube that you're using, but again, lube is your friend. Use lube. Crazy that they have like intimacy garments on during this exchange. Isn't that wild? Pause really quick. This is the moment in the scene that's like particularly difficult for folks. The frustrating thing is that this could have been a nice moment for somebody to embrace like in a sense of empowerment in regards to sex. A lot of people struggle with feelings of self-judgment and shame and fear about their bodies, especially in regards to like being on top during penetrative sex. For what it's worth, this is a thing that we should unlearn. People should be allowed to explore a variety of sexual positions regardless of what your body looks like, because first of all, no one should care. But second of all, again, sex is not a performance, and exploring different positions and like different means of penetration can change the sensation and the experiences and can be a great tool for growing connection between a couple. So like, it's disappointing that this moment where we could have seen this person who was very sheltered and had a sense of shame about their sexuality, this could have been Daphne coming into her sense of empowerment and like control and joy and all of this stuff that got turned into SA. This is the moment at which, done, if your partner ever says things like, wait, hold on, stop, gives you a face where they look concerned like this, game over. We are done. I also want to give people the, encouragement, I guess, that consenting to sex at the beginning of an encounter does not mean that you're consenting to the entirety of that encounter, right? This is an issue that comes up a lot. I think it's been probably more commonly discussed in regards to people who are typically targeted by misogyny being assaulted, but this is a conversation that unfortunately doesn't often extend to men and people who we view as like benefiting from misogyny and the patriarchy, but it's an important conversation to have. Just because, like, for example, Simon initiated this encounter and Simon is the man in this exchange does not mean that he's impossible to assault, right? This is a thing that happens a lot where men who have been sexually assaulted get blamed for this and are also told that, like, you know, you're being a baby or you're being dramatic or that doesn't happen, right? I just want to be clear that that's not true. It isn't. This is very much a moment where Daphne is assaulting Simon because he gave her a very clear indication that this is not something that he's okay with or that he's consented to, and she completely disregarded that. That fucking sucks. This is literally assault. I don't care what anybody fucking says. That's not being dramatic. It's not being like, I don't know, the woke police or whatever it is that people fucking say about this stuff. It is entirely possible to assault a man, and that's literally what this looks like. Yeah, this is not okay. Face that she makes is also really fucking upsetting. I think this is also a good moment for us to talk about the fact that there is a common misconception that SA is the result of desire gone awry, or like, especially in the typical lens, people talk about women being assaulted by men, that like men just can't control themselves, right? They're being whipped up by lust. And so that's why we can't give people sex education. That's why we shouldn't talk about sex or show sex on TV because it will stir up desires that can't be righteously fulfilled. That's not true. At the core, most of the time, obviously there's room for caveats and nuance and all the things, but I would say most of the time, SA is a conversation about power and control and the misuse of that, right? This is literally a moment of Daphne abusing her position of power to force her, like, control over Simon, right? This is an issue of wanting to be in power and wanting to exert your control over someone else. And so especially if you have been a victim in this regard, please know that there is nothing that you could have done or said or didn't say or didn't do that would have made you like not be assaulted by that person or like not have been like deserving or would have made you deserve to not be assaulted, right? Ultimately at the core, what we're talking about is somebody utilizing an unfair power dynamic to exert their power and control over you. And that has nothing to do with your behavior or your clothes or your thoughts or your feelings or things that you've said. The truth is that people who assault you are ultimately using this unfair power imbalance to pervert a power and control issue that they have within themselves. And so again, I just want to be clear that like this cultural rhetoric of like, well, what were you wearing and all this stuff is irrelevant and also fucking gross, right? At the core, it's not about desire. It's not about being physically aroused or visually stimulated. This is about power and control. That's the problem here. Okay, listen, I want to be clear. My intention was to talk about all of the sex scenes from season 1 and season 2 today. But as we know, I'm a yapper. We do, in fact, kind of just talk on this channel. So we'll probably make a separate video where we talk about the sex scenes from season 2. Because also, quite frankly, I don't think I can talk about like, ooh, happy, fun time, sexy sex after we just talked about assault. Feels weird to me. So we're going to make a different dedicated video about season 2. And then because season 3 is coming out, I've already watched part 1 of season 3 and it's so good. We'll talk about the carriage scene. Don't you worry. So we'll make 2 more dedicated videos about the sex scenes from Bridgerton so that hopefully we can educate a little bit more about sex and all of the things. If you enjoy the video, make sure that you like it. You can leave me comments and all of those things. You can also subscribe. We make videos like this. And we also do like an educational moment that I'd love to have you stay for. And then you can share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.